They don't need to break you with force. They only need to rewrite the story you believe in, because once your past is altered, your future no longer belongs to you. Most people believe they think for themselves, but their beliefs are carefully planted narratives recycled from someone else's script. They don't realize that every empire, every government, every dominant ideology throughout history had one mission: rewrite the past so the masses never question the present. The weak accept the version of history they're given. The powerful study the patterns behind it. Most people believe that oppression starts when someone takes their freedom by force. They imagine soldiers, laws, and visible systems of control, but that is only the final stage. The real domination begins long before any physical restraint is applied. It begins in thought. A submissive mind does not need chains. It only needs belief. The moment a man believes resistance is pointless or disobedience is shameful, he becomes his own warden. He polices his thoughts, edits his words, and restricts his own actions to remain within the lines someone else has drawn. Look around. The world praises obedience disguised as wisdom. They teach you to cooperate, be agreeable, fit in, and avoid conflict. Society glorifies compliance as maturity, but look closer and you'll see the blueprint. They want you emotionally compliant so you don't consider alternative paths. When the masses internalize obedience as virtue, they no longer need rulers to enforce it. They enforce it on each other. A population trained to fear disapproval becomes an army that polices itself without ever realizing it's submitting to a script written by someone else. True control is elegant. It doesn't shout commands, it whispers beliefs. It doesn't punish loudly, it rewards conformity subtly. A man who fears punishment is still aware of his chains, but a man who believes submission is the right thing, he kneels willingly, he kneels proudly. He even looks down on those who refuse to kneel and calls them reckless, dangerous, or immoral. That is how thought-based control works. It convinces the controlled that they are not controlled at all. Think about the words people use. That's just how it is. You can't change it. Be realistic. These are not observations, these are spells. Psychological chains disguised as common sense. They are mental programs designed to stop resistance before it begins. Because if someone can stop your rebellion in your mind, they never have to stop you physically. You were taught to submit mentally, so that physical submission never becomes necessary. Children are not born submissive. Watch a child, they question everything, they say why, relentlessly, they have a raw impulse for truth, but it doesn't take long before that fire is put out, not through force but through shame. Don't ask too much, just listen. Stop being difficult. The world doesn't break children with chains, it breaks them with social pressure. And those who survive that pressure with their questioning spirits still alive, they become the few, the rare power thinkers who see the script from the outside. The system does not fear chaos, it fears independence of thought. That is why education trains memory, not thinking. They didn't teach you how power works, they taught you how to follow well. They rewarded you when you repeated information correctly, and punished you when you questioned the source of that information. And so people grow up fluent in obedience, but illiterate in autonomy. Submission is not about kneeling. Submission is about accepting someone else's belief as your own without questioning who benefits from that belief. People today willingly follow trends, ideologies, and movements that do not serve them. They even destroy their own potential to remain aligned with a narrative that was never written for their empowerment. That is the highest form of control. You make the person participate willingly in their own limitation. Look at how fear is used, not fear of violence, fear of isolation, fear of being labeled, fear of losing approval. A society ruled by fear of exclusion is far easier to manage than a society ruled by force. They do not threaten your life, they threaten your belonging, and belonging for the submissive mind is more valuable than truth. But ask yourself, what is the cost of mental safety? What do you sacrifice to be accepted? Most will give up their potential, their voice, and even their principles just to avoid standing alone. They don't realize that all greatness begins in isolation. Every powerful figure in history reached their strength the moment they stopped needing collective approval and started thinking like a sovereign. That separation, mental, not physical, is the birth of real power. Control of thought eliminates the need for visible chains because a man whose thoughts are aligned with his oppressor's vision will never attempt to break free. The prison is no longer outside, it's in his head, disguised as normality, disguised as virtue, disguised as common sense. Most people are ruled by slogans. They cling to catchy phrases, emotional statements, and simplified messages because it's easier than understanding the complex machinery behind power. They repeat what sounds strong instead of studying what makes strength possible. They love words like freedom, unity, justice, but never examine the systems that define those words. They memorize the slogans, but never question who engineered them or for what purpose. That is why they stay controlled. They engage with the decoration, not the architecture. A power thinker, however, is not seduced by surface-level language. When he hears a movement, a speech, or a promise, he does not react emotionally. He steps back and dissects it. He asks, who benefits from this narrative? What psychological need does this slogan target? What system is being constructed underneath these words? Because in every public message, there is a hidden engineering, an infrastructure of influence shaping how people think, react, and comply. The masses fall in love with the tone of a message. Power thinkers analyze the structure behind it. While others chant, they calculate. They observe how public opinion is shaped, who funds the messaging, how repetition is used, how media synchronizes language to create a unified psychological rhythm. The masses say, everyone is saying it, so it must be true. The strategist says, everyone is saying it, so there must be coordination. Let's find the source. Slogans are psychological shortcuts. They're designed to bypass critical thinking and trigger instant alignment. That is why they are simple, emotional, and repetitive. Systems, however, require effort to understand. They are not loud. They are quiet, procedural, and invisible to those who only listen, but do not observe. The submissive look at the announcement. The powerful examine the policy. The submissive celebrate symbolic gestures. The powerful analyze economic shifts hiding behind those gestures. You must understand something ruthless. Power does not care about how something sounds. It cares about how something functions. A strong system can operate under a weak slogan. A weak system can hide behind a noble slogan. This is why you should never be distracted by emotional language. Tyranny can arrive wrapped in words like safety and unity. Control can come dressed as protection and progress. A slogan is the bait. The system is the hook underneath. History is filled with people who cheered for their own control because they were emotionally seduced by slogans. They didn't see the infrastructure of control being built behind the curtain. They didn't notice the laws being rewritten quietly while all attention was on the grand speeches. They didn't track the shift in perception being engineered through news, schools, entertainment, and social dialogue. They thought they were awakening, but they were being formatted. Power thinkers do not participate emotionally. They observe strategically. They map how influence flows, where authority concentrates, and how compliance is manufactured. They do not ask, what are they saying? They ask, what are they building? Because words do not change the world unless there is a system behind them enforcing the change. Notice how people today anchor their beliefs based on social approval. They don't verify anything. They just align with whatever slogan is trending because it feels safe to be part of a collective chant. They don't realize that collective chanting is one of the oldest tools of control. It creates rhythm. Rhythm creates unity. Unity creates a predictable herd pattern, easy to steer, easy to utilize. A true Machiavellian mind understands that power is rarely in the message. Power is in the mechanism behind the message. To see it, you must detach from emotional seduction and enter the realm of analysis. Track who gains influence, who loses, how economic pathways shift, how authority restructures itself after each public event. That is where real intelligence lies. Those who stay naive chase slogans. Those who seek power study systems. And once you start seeing the system, slogans lose their spell over you. You no longer feel compelled to repeat what everyone else is repeating. You start thinking in terms of leverage, position, timing, and advantage. And in that moment, you stop being part of the audience and begin to step into the role of the architect. The greatest tragedy of the modern mind is that it relies on external sources to validate its reality. People no longer document their own truths. They consume narratives handed to them. They wait for official voices to define what is real, what is moral, what is allowed to be remembered. But the moment you give others the right to define your history, you lose your sovereignty over your future. Because history is not just about what happened, it's about what is allowed to be remembered, and what is allowed to be remembered shapes what is allowed to be repeated. Power structures do not fear your opinion. They fear your records. They fear individuals who keep memory alive outside of official channels. That is why every era of control has one consistent pattern. They rewrite the past, not just to erase truth, but to make you forget that alternative paths ever existed. If you forget that strength once stood where weakness now stands, you will believe weakness is your only destiny. If you forget that men once resisted the structures you now bow to, you will think kneeling is natural. To escape the rewrite, you must become your own historian, not in a literal academic sense, but in a personal, strategic one. You must document your own evolution, your own observations, your own philosophies, because the world will constantly attempt to rewrite you, not just your past, but your identity. They will take your younger failures and reshape them into permanent labels. They will take your silence and redefine it as weakness. They will take your act of restraint and call it fear. And if you do not hold your own record of who you are and what you've learned, you will begin to believe their narrative over your own. Most people drift through life with no internal archive of lessons. They repeat the same patterns because they never crystallized their understanding into something conscious. Each year, they experience life, but they forget faster than they learn. They don't record wisdom, they just move from moment to moment, allowing their experiences to dissolve into nothingness. This is why the same mistakes repeat generation after generation, because people inherit slogans, not wisdom. When you begin to think like a strategist, you don't just experience, you extract. After every event, you ask, what was the real power dynamic here? Who benefited? What patterns revealed themselves? What beliefs were pushed subtly in conversation? What was being shaped in silence? And more importantly, how does this piece of truth integrate into my personal doctrine? That doctrine becomes your internal history. And when external narratives attempt to override it, you have a foundation too solid to be rewritten. Understand this: those who control the collective memory control the herd, but those who control their own memory control themselves. Once you begin to write your own doctrine, mentally, philosophically, spiritually, you become difficult to manipulate, because now you compare every new narrative being pushed against your own archive. Instead of absorbing information, you challenge it, weigh it, examine who it serves. You stop being a receiver and become a filter. This is why ancient warriors, philosophers, and rulers all kept journals, manifestos, and codes. They didn't do it for sentiment. They did it to solidify memory into identity, so that when the world tried to redefine them, there would be something internal that stood as proof against the rewrite. They understood that without recorded thought, a mind becomes fog easily shaped by stronger wills. To escape mental servitude, you must build your own internal archive. Store principles, not just quotes. Store patterns, not just facts. Do not rely on history books written by those in power to teach you about power. Study the outcomes, not just the stories. Collect truth from observation, not just from teachings. Become your own historian so that when the world tries to dictate who you are, where you come from, and what is possible for you, you have your own authority to reference. When you reach that point, you no longer ask for permission to believe differently. You no longer seek validation from systems built to contain you. You stand firm, not because the world agrees with your memory, but because your memory was forged from direct awareness rather than inherited narrative. And in that state, the rewrite loses its power, because a mind anchored in its own truth cannot be reformatted like a file waiting for new code. When you understand how memory is controlled, how submission begins in thought, how slogans distract from systems, and how dangerous it is to let others write your history, you begin to see the world differently. You no longer move like the majority, reacting emotionally to whatever narrative is presented. Instead, you step back, observe, and recognize the architecture of influence that surrounds you. Most people live inside a story they didn't write, repeating beliefs they didn't examine, defending systems that were never designed for their elevation. But once you awaken to these mechanisms, you reclaim your authority over perception, thought, and identity. This mindset is not comfortable. It isolates you from the masses who find safety in collective obedience. It strips away the illusions that made life simple, but it also gives you something far greater: clarity. And clarity is lethal to control, because a clear mind cannot be manipulated by noise. A clear mind does not worship slogans or submit to emotional currents crafted by unseen hands. It analyzes, it measures, it chooses. Most will continue to live as archives of someone else's version of reality, but a few, the ones who study power rather than cheer for it, will write their own doctrine, hold their own memory, and navigate life with strategic awareness. Those few are not submissive, they are not reactive, they are not part of the rewritten past. They are authors of a different future,